Picture a world that exists only in whispers now, a world before the Great Drowning. The air is different here, cooler. The horizon stretches farther than it does today, because the oceans have not yet claimed what they will soon swallow. Valleys hum with rivers that no longer exist. Coastlines extend miles beyond the maps we know. And beneath skies unmarred by the smoke of industry, ancient peoples gather around fires, telling stories their children will forget. They do not know what is coming. Somewhere in the north, ice the color of ancient bone begins to weep. Slowly at first, then all at once. The planet is waking from a frozen dream, and the cost of that awakening will be written in water. But here, in this moment before the deluge, life is abundant. Hunters track herds across plains that will become seabeds. Fishermen cast nets into estuaries that will vanish beneath hundreds of feet of rising tide. Communities thrive along rivers that will soon rage beyond recognition. They carve symbols into stone. They bury their dead with care. They watch the stars and mark the seasons. They do not yet know they are living in the final chapter of a world. Across every inhabited continent, the story will be the same. The water will come. Some will survive. And those survivors will tell their children, who will tell theirs, until the memory of the flood becomes myth, becomes scripture, becomes legend. Yet beneath the poetry and the gods, beneath the arcs and the heroes, a singular truth pulses like a heartbeat. Asterisk, something happened. Asterisk, from the Tigris to the Ganges, from the Nile to the Yellow River, from the islands of the Pacific to the frozen coasts of the Arctic, humanity remembers a flood. Not one people, not one region. Asterisk, all of them. Asterisk, different names, different gods, different boats, but the same rising water, the same terror, the same desperate hope for higher ground. This is not coincidence. This is memory. And memory, as we will see, does not lie, even when it is wrapped in the language of the divine. 20,000 years ago, ice covered the world like a second sky. Glaciers sprawled across Canada, Scandinavia, Siberia. Walls of frozen time, kilometers thick, grinding continents beneath their weight. So much water was locked in ice that the oceans sat more than 120 meters lower than they do today. Land bridges connected continents. You could walk from Asia to America, from Britain to Europe. The planet was unrecognizable. And then the climate shifted. Around 14,700 years ago, temperatures began to rise. The ice, which had stood for millennia, began to collapse. Not gradually, not gently, in pulses, in floods, in catastrophic bursts that reshaped the surface of the Earth in days, not centuries. Scientists call them meltwater pulses. The largest meltwater pulse 1A occurred around 14,600 years ago. In less than 500 years, sea levels rose by as much as 20 meters. Coastal plains drowned. Estuaries became bays. Rivers became seas. Communities that had thrived for generations found themselves fleeing inland, watching the horizon swallow everything they knew. But that was only the beginning. Another surge came around 8,200 years ago. Another around 7,600 years ago, when the Bosporus Strait breached, and the Mediterranean poured into the Black Sea basin with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. Lakes became inland seas. Valleys became abysses. And everywhere, asterisk, people ran. These were not gentle rises measured in millimeters per year. These were floods. Real, violent, civilization-ending floods. And the people who survived them carried the memory forward like a wound that would not heal. Geologists have mapped the evidence. Sediment cores, drowned forests, submerged shorelines. The data is undeniable. Between 15,000 and 5,000 years ago, the world drowned in stages. And in every place where people lived near water, which is to say, nearly everywhere, the story was told. Again and again. A flood that came from the heavens, or the deep, or the anger of the gods. A hero who built a boat, a remnant who survived, a new world born from the ashes of the old. The myths are not fiction. They are echoes. Echoes of the day the ice wept, and the waters rose, and the ancient world slipped beneath the waves. Centuries before Noah ever set foot on an ark, another man stood at the edge of the world's ending. His name was Ziusudra, and his story was carved into clay over 4,000 years ago in the city-states of Sumer, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers met the Persian Gulf, a landscape of reeds, mud, and gods who spoke through dreams. According to the Sumerian tablets, the gods grew weary of humanity. The noise of civilization disturbed their rest. The clamor of cities offended their ears. And so they decided to erase what they had made. A flood, they decreed. A flood to cleanse the earth. But one god, Enki, the lord of the deep waters, took pity. He came to Ziusudra in secret, speaking through the walls of a reed hut, and warned him, "Tear down your house. Build a boat. Save the seed of all living things." Ziusudra obeyed. He built the vessel, sealed it with bitumen, loaded it with animals, grain, craftsmen, his family. And when the skies opened, when the rivers swelled beyond their banks, when the very foundations of the deep broke apart, he floated. For 7 days and 7 nights, the world drowned. Cities vanished. Fields became lakes. The ziggurat towers of Ur and Eridu stood like islands in a sea of mud. And when the waters finally receded, Ziusudra offered sacrifice, and the gods granted him immortality for his obedience. This is the oldest written flood story we possess, but it is not the only version from Mesopotamia. Centuries later, the same tale reappeared in the Epic of Gilgamesh *, this time with the hero named Utnapishtim. Same flood, same boat, same divine warning, same survival. The story had already become ancient by the time it was inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform. And here is the question that haunts us. Why? Why would the Sumerians, master engineers, architects of the first cities, inventors of writing itself, tell a story of the world being swallowed by water? Because it happened, not as divine punishment, not as cosmic reset, but as geology. The Persian Gulf, where Sumer once thrived, was a river valley at the end of the Ice Age. As sea levels rose, the Gulf refilled, quickly, violently. Entire settlements were inundated. The land that had been fertile floodplain became open water. The people who lived there fled north, carrying their stories with them. Meanwhile, the Tigris and Euphrates, fed by melting glaciers and seasonal storms, were prone to catastrophic flooding. Sediment layers from ancient yore show evidence of sudden, massive inundations that buried entire strata of habitation. The flood was not metaphor. It was Tuesday. And so the Sumerians wrote it down, not as history, but as theology, because for them, there was no difference. The gods asterisk were asterisk the weather. The cosmos asterisk was asterisk the river. And the memory of drowning became the myth of divine wrath. But the story did not end in Sumer. It traveled, upriver, across deserts, into the hands of other peoples who would rewrite it in their own languages, with their own gods, until it reached the shores of the Mediterranean and became the story we know best. The story of a man named Noah. Somewhere along the banks of the Jordan River or in the hills of ancient Canaan, a scribe sat down and wrote a story that would echo through millennia. It began with corruption. Humanity had grown wicked, violent, filled with evil. And God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, looked upon his creation and regretted it. "I will blot out man whom I have created," he said. "I will send a flood." But one man found favor. His name was Noah, a righteous man in a crooked generation. And God gave him a command: build an ark. Make it from gopher wood. Coat it inside and out with pitch. Bring 2 of every living thing, 7 pairs of the clean animals, your family, and wait. Noah obeyed. For years he built. And when the rains began, when the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the windows of heaven opened, the world drowned for 40 days and 40 nights. Mountains were covered. Every living thing perished. Only Noah, his family, and the creatures in the ark survived. The story is familiar. It has been told in Sunday schools and synagogues for thousands of years. But it is not original. The biblical flood is a retelling, a Hebrew adaptation of older Mesopotamian myths. Scholars have known this since the 19th century, when archaeologists unearthed the Epic of Gilgamesh in the ruins of Nineveh. The parallels are undeniable. The ark, the animals, the dove sent to find dry land, the sacrifice offered afterward. Even the dimensions of Noah's ark, 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high, echo the proportions described in Babylonian texts. But here is where it becomes more than literature, because beneath the theology, beneath the moral framework of divine judgment and redemption, there may be actual events. In the 1990s, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed a startling theory. Around 7,600 years ago, the Bosporus Strait, a narrow land bridge separating the Mediterranean from the Black Sea basin, catastrophically breached. The Black Sea at that time was a freshwater lake, sitting more than 100 meters lower than it does today. When the breach occurred, seawater poured in with unimaginable force, raising the lake's level by hundreds of feet and flooding thousands of square kilometers of inhabited land. This was not a gradual rise. This was a biblical-scale deluge. Communities along the Black Sea's shores would have fled in terror, carrying the memory of the flood with them as they migrated south into Mesopotamia, west into Europe, east into the steppes. Meanwhile, in the Persian Gulf, underwater surveys have revealed drowned river valleys and submerged settlements dating to the early Holocene, evidence that the Gulf itself may have flooded rapidly as sea levels rose. Add to this the periodic, catastrophic flooding of the Tigris-Euphrates system, and you have a cultural landscape shaped by water, a landscape where the memory of drowning was not myth, but lived experience. The story of Noah is not a fabrication. It is a cultural memory crystallized into scripture. The names changed, the theology evolved, but the water was real. And the story did not stop with the Hebrews. It traveled south into Egypt, where the memory of water took on a different shape, not as destruction, but as the very fabric of creation itself. In the beginning, there was only water, not a flood, not a deluge, but an infinite, dark, formless ocean called Nun, the primordial abyss from which all existence emerged. This was Egypt's cosmology. Before the gods, before the sun, before even time itself, there was only the water. And then, from the depths of Nun, a mound of earth rose. On that mound stood Adam, the first god, self-created, alone in the vastness. He spoke the names of other gods into being. Shu, the air; Tefnut, moisture; Geb, the earth; Nut, the sky. And from them came all the others: Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, until the cosmos as the Egyptians knew it was complete. But Nun never disappeared. It surrounded the world like a cosmic womb. It was the water beneath the earth, the water above the sky, the water at the edges of existence. Every night, the sun god Re sailed his solar bark across the underworld, through the waters of Nun, battling chaos in the form of the serpent Apophis, only to be reborn at dawn. Water was not destruction in Egyptian thought. It was origin asterisk. Yet even here, in this theology of eternal cycles, we find echoes of flood memory. Consider the Nile. Every year, without fail, it flooded. The inundation, ****, was the cornerstone of Egyptian life. When the river rose, it brought fertile black silt from the highlands of Ethiopia, renewing the land, ensuring abundance. The flood was divine. It was Hapi, the god of the inundation, blessing the valley with life. But sometimes the flood did not come, and sometimes it came too strong. In years of low inundation, famine followed. In years of excessive flooding, villages drowned, dikes collapsed, mud buried fields. The memory of these extremes, both drought and deluge, is woven into Egypt's historical records. The famine stela at Seal Island speaks of 7 years of low Nile. The Old Kingdom's collapse around 2200 BCE coincides with climatic upheaval and failing floods. So when the Egyptians spoke of none, were they remembering something more ancient? A time before the desert, when the Sahara was green, when Great Lakes dotted North Africa, when the world was wetter, wilder, and more dangerous? Geological evidence suggests that around 5,000 years ago, the African humid period ended. Lakes dried, rivers vanished. A Sahara became a desert. But before that, Egypt's landscape was unrecognizable. Vast wetlands, seasonal floods, megafauna roaming savannas that are now sand. Did the memory of that wetter world survive in myth? Did the notion of a primordial ocean reflect not divine imagination, but ancestral memory of a time when water dominated the world? We cannot know for certain. But the resonance is there. And as we move east, across the Arabian Sea, the theme deepens, because in India, the flood myth does not begin with gods at all. It begins with a fish. In the ancient texts of the Shatapatha Brahmana, written over 2,500 years ago, there is a story that predates most flood myths in recorded form, and yet feels startlingly familiar. A man named Manu, the first human, the progenitor of humanity, was washing his hands in a river when a small fish came to him. The fish spoke. "Protect me," it said, "and I will save you from a great flood that is coming." Manu, moved by compassion, placed the fish in a jar, but the fish grew. So he moved it to a larger vessel, then to a pond, then to a lake. Finally, when the fish had grown enormous, Manu released it into the ocean, and the fish revealed itself as Matsya, an avatar of the god Vishnu. "The flood is near," Matsya warned. "Build a boat. Take the seeds of all plants. Gather the sages. When the waters rise, tie your boat to my horn, and I will guide you to safety." Manu obeyed. The deluge came. The oceans rose. The earth vanished beneath the waves. But Matsya, now a great horned fish or sea creature, pulled the boat through the churning waters to the peak of the Himalayas. There, Manu waited as the waters receded, and when the world was dry again, he became the ancestor of the new human race. The parallels to Noah, to Ziusudra, to Utnapishtim are undeniable. The warning, the ark, the survival, the rebirth of civilization. But this version carries a distinctly Indian cosmological weight. The emphasis on **Dharma**, on cosmic cycles, on the dissolution and renewal of worlds. Hindu cosmology speaks of yugas, vast ages of time in which the universe is created, sustained and destroyed, only to be reborn. The flood is not a singular event. It is inevitable. It is the breath of Brahma, the inhalation and exhalation of eternity. But could there be geological truth here as well? India's coastlines have changed dramatically over the past 10,000 years. The Gulf of Kamat, off the western coast, has revealed submerged structures and artifacts in underwater surveys. Remnants of settlements drowned as sea levels rose. Dwarka, the legendary city of Krishna, described in the Mahabharata as a golden metropolis, is said to have sunk beneath the Arabian Sea. Marine archaeology has uncovered stone structures, walls, and anchors off the coast of modern Gujarat, dating back thousands of years. Meanwhile, the Indian Ocean itself was shaped by monsoonal flooding, tsunamis, and the rapid inundation of coastal plains during the early Holocene. Entire river valleys became bays. Estuaries became gulfs. The story of Manu is not pure metaphor. It is memory encoded in theology, a memory of when the waters came, and only those who heeded the warning survived. And as the flood myths spread further east, they take on new forms. In China, the deluge is not sent by gods. It is tamed by a hero. In the annals of Chinese history, there is a figure who stands at the boundary between myth and reality, a man named Yu the Great, founder of the Xia dynasty, tamer of the floods. The story goes like this. For generations, China was plagued by catastrophic flooding. The Yellow River, the sorrow of China, overflowed its banks year after year, drowning farmland, destroying villages, turning the plains into inland seas. The people cried out. The emperors despaired, and the gods, watching from the heavens, decided to act. They sent a man named Gun to stop the floods. Gun's method was simple: build dikes, raise barriers, contain the water by force. But the more he built, the more the river raged. The floods worsened. After 9 years of failure, Gun was executed for his incompetence. Then came his son, Yu. Yu understood what his father had not. You cannot fight the river. You can only guide it. For 13 years, Yu traveled across China, dredging channels, carving canals, opening pathways for the water to flow safely to the sea. He worked without rest, passing his own home 3 times without stopping. So dedicated was he to the task. And slowly, the floods subsided. The rivers returned to their courses. The land became habitable again. For his efforts, Yu was made emperor. The Xia dynasty began. And China, unified by the memory of the Great Flood and the hero who saved them, entered history. For centuries, this story was considered pure legend, a founding myth, a moral tale about perseverance and humility. But in 2016, scientists published findings that changed everything. Sedimentary analysis from the Yellow River Valley revealed evidence of a massive flood around 1920 BCE, precisely the time period attributed to Yu as rain. A landslide on the upper Yellow River had created a natural dam. For months, water built up behind it. When the dam finally broke, it released a torrent estimated at 300,000 to 500,000 cubic meters per second, one of the largest freshwater floods in recorded history. The floodwaters surged downstream, inundating the valley, destroying settlements, reshaping the landscape. And in the aftermath, a new political order emerged, the Xia dynasty, the centralization of power, the beginning of dynastic China. The story of Yu was not fabrication. It was memory. Memory of a real event, woven into the cultural identity of a civilization. The flood happened. A leader responded, and that response became the foundation of Chinese history. Across the ocean, in the mountains and jungles of Mesoamerica, another people told another version of the same story. But this time, the flood was not the beginning of history. It was the end of entire worlds. In the mountains of Thessaly, long before Athens or Sparta rose to power, there lived a man named Deucalion and his wife, Pyrrha. They were righteous in a world that had grown corrupt. Humanity, the Greeks said, had fallen into decadence. The Bronze Age men were violent, prideful, impious. And Zeus, king of the gods, decided to cleanse the earth. He sent a flood, not from the rivers, not from the seas, but from the sky itself. Rain fell for 9 days and 9 nights, drowning the valleys, submerging the hills, covering even the peaks of Parnassus. Cities vanished, temples crumbled, humanity perished. But Deucalion, warned by his father Prometheus, the titan who had stolen fire from mankind, built a chest, a small ark, and sealed himself and Pyrrha inside. For 9 days they floated on the drowned world, until at last the chest came to rest on Mount Parnassus. When the waters receded, Deucalion and Pyrrha found themselves alone. The world was empty, silent, and they wept. But the oracle of Themis, the goddess of divine law, spoke to them. "Throw the bones of your mother behind you as you walk." They puzzled over this riddle. Then Pyrrha understood. "Our mother is Gaia, the earth. Her bones are stones." So they walked, and as they walked, they threw stones over their shoulders. The stones Deucalion threw became men. The stones Pyrrha threw became women. And from these stone-born humans, the new race of Greece was born. This is the Greek flood myth, a story of divine wrath, survival, and renewal. But like the others, it may be rooted in more than imagination. The Aegean basin underwent dramatic transformations at the end of the Ice Age. Sea levels rose. Land bridges disappeared. Islands that were once hills became isolated. The fertile plains of what is now the Aegean seafloor were drowned, and the communities living there would have been displaced, traumatized, scattered. Moreover, the Mediterranean itself is seismically active. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. The explosion of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE sent massive waves across the Aegean, devastating Minoan civilization. Entire coastal settlements were wiped out in minutes. The Greeks lived in a landscape where catastrophe was common. Where the earth shook, the seas rose, and the sky turned to ash. Is it any wonder their mythology is filled with floods, fires, and divine retribution? The story of Deucalion is not unique. It is the Aegeans' version of a global memory, the memory of the waters rising and the world being remade. But across the Atlantic, in lands unknown to the Greeks, other civilizations were telling the same story. And they too spoke of worlds that drowned and gods who wept. In the highlands of Mexico, in the codices of the Aztec and the stone carvings of the Maya, there is a concept called the asterisk, sun's asterisk, a cyclical view of time in which the universe is created, destroyed, and created again, over and over, in vast epochs. Each sun is an age. Each age ends in catastrophe. The first sun, according to Aztec cosmology, was destroyed by jaguars. The second sun by hurricanes. The third by fire and volcanic rain. And the fourth sun, asterisk Nahu-e-Adal asterisk, the son of water, was destroyed by a great flood. In this age, the world was inhabited by giants who lived peacefully until the gods grew displeased. Tlaloc, the rain god, opened the heavens. Water poured down for 52 years. The oceans rose. The mountains were covered. And all of humanity drowned, except for one man and one woman, who saved themselves in a hollowed-out log and floated until the waters receded. When they emerged, they lit a fire to cook fish. But the smoke angered the gods, who transformed the couple into dogs as punishment for surviving. The fifth sun, the current age, is said to be doomed to end in earthquakes. This is not metaphor. This is cosmology. The Maya and Aztec believed that creation was fragile, that the world had ended before, and that it would end again. Time was not linear. It was cyclical, violent, and precarious. And once again, geology whispers confirmation. Central America is a land of volcanoes, earthquakes, and hurricanes. The Yucatan Peninsula was shaped by sea level changes and tropical storms. Lake sediments in highland Mexico show evidence of catastrophic flooding. Tsunami deposits along the Pacific coast hint at massive waves triggered by offshore earthquakes. Moreover, the Olmec, the Maya, and other early Mesoamerican cultures thrived along coastlines and river valleys that would have been profoundly vulnerable to rapid sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age. Entire settlements could have been lost. The myth of the fourth sun may not be invention. It may be memory, dressed in the language of gods and cosmic cycles, but rooted in the lived experience of catastrophe. And if we travel further still, across the Pacific, to the scattered islands of Polynesia, we find something even more remarkable. Flood stories that are not myth at all, but maps. The Pacific Ocean holds secrets older than writing. Across its vast expanse, from Hawaii to New Zealand, from Easter Island to the atolls of Micronesia, indigenous peoples have preserved oral traditions of lands that once existed but are now lost beneath the waves. In Hawaiian legend, there is a story of the goddess Pele and her sister, the sea goddess Namaka. When the two fought, Namaka flooded the islands, drowning the lowlands and forcing the people to flee to the mountains. In Maori tradition, the hero Mandi'u is said to have fished up the North Island of New Zealand from the depths of the ocean, a story that echoes the formation of islands rising from the sea. But these are not merely origin myths. They are asterisk maps asterisk. Anthropologists and geologists working together have discovered that many Polynesian flood stories describe real, drowned landmasses, places that existed during the Ice Age when sea levels were lower and that were submerged as the ice melted. For example, the oral histories of the Torres Strait Islanders between Australia and Papua New Guinea speak of a time when the two lands were connected, when you could walk between them. This is geologically accurate. The strait only flooded around 8,000 years ago. In Micronesia, stories tell of large islands that sank into the sea, leaving only small atolls behind. Bathymetric surveys confirm that many of these atolls sit atop submerged plateaus, evidence of once larger landmasses drowned by rising seas. In Vanuatu, legends speak of entire villages swallowed by the ocean. Underwater surveys have found stone structures and pottery in shallow coastal waters, dating to the early Holocene. The Pacific peoples did not have writing for much of their history, but they had something more powerful, memory preserved in song, chant, and navigation lore. And that memory is startlingly accurate. Oral tradition, it turns out, can preserve geography for thousands of years. The islands remember. The songs remember. The stories are not fiction. They are cartography. And this same precision, this same faithfulness to the past, can be found in the coldest reaches of the earth, where ice and water have shaped not only the land, but the very soul of survival. At the edge of the frozen world, where the tundra meets the ice, the Inuit and the Siberian peoples tell stories of a time when the waters came from below. In Inuit cosmology, the sea goddess Sedna controls the animals of the ocean. When humans displease her, she withholds the seals, the whales, the fish. But in older stories, Sedna is associated with a great flood, a time when the waters rose and swallowed the land, and only those who paddled their kayaks to the highest ice survived. Among the Shukshi of northeastern Siberia, there is a tale of a great wave sent by the creator god, a wave so immense it drowned the world. Only a few people survived by climbing to the tops of mountains, and from them, all living humans descended. These are harsh lands. The ice here does not melt. It cracks, shifts, grinds. Glacial lakes form behind ice dams, then burst catastrophically, sending walls of water across valleys in minutes. Permafrost collapses. Coastal cliffs erode into the Arctic Ocean. The landscape is in constant, violent flux. During the end of the Ice Age, the Arctic and subarctic regions experienced some of the most dramatic environmental changes on Earth. Glacial lakes the size of seas, like Lake Agassiz in North America, periodically drained in catastrophic outbursts, flooding downstream regions with biblical fury. The Younger Dryas event around 12,800 years ago may have been triggered by such a flood, a sudden release of meltwater into the North Atlantic that disrupted ocean currents and plunged the Northern Hemisphere back into near-glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. The peoples of the Arctic lived through this. They witnessed ice dams fail. They watched valleys fill with water overnight. They fled across frozen seas that later melted beneath them. Their stories are not allegory. They are survival records. And like the Inuit, like the Chukchi, like the Polynesians, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia also remember. But their memory goes deeper than almost anyone else's, because their stories are not centuries old. They are millennia old, and they are precise. In the oral traditions of Aboriginal Australians, there are stories that should not exist. They speak of coastlines that disappeared thousands of years before recorded history, of bays that were once dry land, of islands that were once hills, of places that can only be seen now with sonar and submersibles, yet the stories describe them as if they were visited yesterday. Take, for example, the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land. They tell of a time when the Arafura Sea was dry, when you could walk to what are now islands, when the land extended far beyond the current shore. Geologists confirm, during the Ice Age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower. The Gulf of Carpentaria was a freshwater lake. The Arafura Shelf was dry land. The stories are not myth. They are memory. In southeastern Australia, the Gunditjmara people speak of volcanic eruptions, of lava flows, of lakes formed by craters. And indeed, the Buj Bin volcanic complex shows evidence of eruptions around 37,000 years ago, and possibly more recent activity within the last 10,000 years. But the most astonishing examples come from the coastlines. Aboriginal stories from Spencer Gulf, Port Phillip Bay, and the Great Barrier Reef region describe lands now underwater, lands that were drowned between 7,000 and 13,000 years ago. Linguist and geographer Patrick Nunn has cataloged over 20 distinct Aboriginal flood narratives that correspond to real, datable sea level changes. These are not vague allusions. They are asterisk descriptions of specific bays, specific islands, specific geographical features. How is this possible? Because Aboriginal culture has maintained continuous oral tradition for over 65,000 years. Their songs are not just stories. They are song lines, mnemonic maps that encode landscape, law, history, and survival knowledge. The land is the library. The song is the text. And the text remembers the flood. This is the longest unbroken chain of human memory on Earth, and it tells us something profound. Myth is not always metaphor. Sometimes myth is the only history we have. Which brings us to a specific event, a moment so catastrophic, so sudden, so precisely datable, that some scholars believe it may be the origin of the Noah story itself. 7,600 years ago, the world ended for the people living along the shores of a vast freshwater lake. It was not a lake as we think of them. It was enormous, stretching across what is now the Black Sea Basin, fed by rivers from the melting glaciers of the north, surrounded by fertile plains where Neolithic farmers had built villages, planted wheat, raised livestock. The lake sat more than 100 meters below sea level. It was peaceful. It was stable. Until the Bosporus broke. To the west, the Mediterranean Sea was rising. Slowly, over centuries, meltwater from the dying ice sheets filled the oceans. And eventually, the rising Mediterranean reached the lip of the Bosporus Strait, a narrow strip of land that separated it from the Black Sea Basin. The pressure built, the land eroded, and one day, perhaps in a single catastrophic moment, the land gave way. Seawater poured through the breach with a force geologists estimate at 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls. Every day, the lake rose by inches, then feet, then meters. Within months, the shoreline had moved kilometers inland. Villages drowned. Farmland became seabed. Forests turned to ghost groves beneath the waves. And the people, tens of thousands of them, fled. Some went north into the steppes. Some went south into Anatolia and Mesopotamia. Some went west into the Balkans and beyond. And everywhere they went, they carried the story. The water came and the world ended. This event, first proposed by geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the 1990s, has since been supported by sediment cores, drowned shorelines, and freshwater mollusk shells buried beneath layers of saltwater sediment. The flood was real. The timing matches, and the migration patterns, traced through archaeology and genetics, align with the dispersal of Neolithic farming cultures into exactly the regions where the oldest flood myths appear. Could this be the flood remembered in the Epic of Gilgamesh? In the story of Noah? In the Greek tale of Deucalion? We cannot prove it, but the coincidence is staggering, and it reminds us that the earth does not forget, even when we do, because beneath the waves, in places we have only begun to explore, there are cities, harbors, temples, streets, entire civilizations, drowned and silent, waiting. Imagine descending into the water, down through the blue, past the light, into the dim world where the sea has kept its secrets. Ahead, shapes emerge, not rocks, not reefs, walls, straight lines, right angles, columns lying in rows, pottery shards scattered like breadcrumbs, and farther still, foundations of buildings, streets laid in grids, harbors carved from stone, silent, submerged, forgotten. These are not legends. These are places you can visit, if you have the equipment, if you know where to look. Off the coast of Gujarat, India, divers have explored the ruins of Dwarka, the legendary city of Krishna, described in the Mahabharata as a golden metropolis that sank into the sea. Underwater archaeology has revealed stone structures, walls, and anchors dating back thousands of years, now resting in 20 meters of water. In the Mediterranean, the city of Heracleion, once Egypt's greatest port, was discovered submerged in the Bay of Abu Qir. Statues of gods, anchors, coins, temples, an entire city swallowed by the sea after earthquakes and subsidence over centuries. Off the coast of Japan near Yanaguni Island lies a formation so geometrically precise that some believe it to be a man-made monument. Terraces, steps, pillars, carved into stone long before the area was submerged at the end of the Ice Age. Near Bimini in the Bahamas, underwater explorers have photographed what they call the Bimini Road, a linear arrangement of stones that some claim is an ancient roadway or harbor structure, now beneath the waves. Not all of these sites are universally accepted as human-made. Skeptics argue that natural geology can mimic architecture, but the question remains, how many real cities lie beneath the ocean, waiting to be found? During the Ice Age, sea levels were over 120 meters lower. Coastlines extended far beyond their current positions, and humans, as always, lived near water. If civilizations existed along those ancient shores, fishing villages, trading ports, early cities, they would now be underwater. And most of them would never be found because the continental shelves are vast, and we have surveyed only a fraction of the seafloor. But occasionally, the sea yields a clue. A wall, a harbor, a carved stone. And we are reminded the flood did not just drown the land. It drowned history, which raises another question. If the flood was real and the survivors carried the memory forward, did they also carry something else? Knowledge, technology, astronomy, encoded not in texts, which did not yet exist, but in stone? Some monuments are older than the pyramids, older than writing, older than agriculture itself, and yet they speak. At Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, massive stone pillars arranged in circles rise from the earth. They were carved and erected around 11,600 years ago, during the transition from the Ice Age to the Holocene, when the glaciers were still melting, when the world was still flooding. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They had no cities, no metal tools, no domesticated animals. And yet they moved stones weighing 10 tons and carved them with intricate reliefs of animals, lions, Foxes, vultures, serpents, scorpions. Why? Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who excavated the site, called it a temple. But temples are built by settled peoples. These builders were nomads. So why gather here? Why invest such labor? One theory: Göbekli Tepe was a gathering place for survivors. A monument not to gods, but to memory. A place where the scattered peoples of the region, displaced by climate change, by rising seas, by the drowning of the old world, came together to preserve what they knew. And what they knew was written in the sky. Look closely at the pillars. The animal carvings are not random. They correspond to constellations, asterisms that mark the night sky. The fox, the vulture, the scorpion. These are the stars of the ecliptic, the path of the sun through the heavens. Some researchers believe the carvings are a star map, a record of celestial events, perhaps even a warning. On Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, there is an image of a headless man, a scorpion, and a vulture. Above them, a circle. Some interpret this as a depiction of a comet impact, an event that occurred around 12,800 years ago, triggering the Younger Dryas and unleashing catastrophic flooding. Whether or not this interpretation is correct, the message is clear. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were marking time. They were remembering something, and they wanted future generations to remember too. The same impulse appears in Malta, where Neolithic temples older than Stonehenge align with solstices and equinoxes. In Nabta Playa in the Egyptian desert, where stone circles track the stars and the seasons. At Stonehenge itself, where megaliths frame the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset with geometric precision. These are not mere monuments. They are memory devices. Calendars in stone, observatories, libraries built to outlast language, to outlast civilizations, to outlast even the memory of the builders themselves. Because stone does not forget. And the stones say, we were here. We saw the sky change. We survived. But what exactly did they survive? And why did they feel the need to encode it in monuments that would stand for 10,000 years? There comes a point in every inquiry when the strands of evidence, geology, archaeology, mythology, climatology begin to weave together. Individually, each flood myth can be explained as local memory, cultural borrowing, or metaphor, but collectively, they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. Let's summarize what we know. Between 15,000 and 5,000 years ago, global sea levels rose by approximately 120 meters. This was not a gradual process. It occurred in pulses, sudden bursts of meltwater released from collapsing ice sheets. The largest of these, Meltwater Pulse 1A around 14,600 years ago, raised sea levels by 20 meters in less than 500 years. Coastlines that had been inhabited for millennia were drowned. River valleys became bays. Estuaries became seas. Entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. Simultaneously, regional catastrophes compounded the global rise. The Black Sea breach around 7,600 years ago, the flooding of the Persian Gulf, glacial lake outbursts in North America and Siberia, tsunamis triggered by undersea earthquakes, volcanic eruptions in the Mediterranean and the Pacific. Communities living near water, which is to say, most communities, experienced catastrophic displacement. They fled, they adapted, and they remembered. The memory took different forms depending on culture, language, and theology. But the core event, the flood, remained. Myth, in this sense, is not fiction. It is data. Paleoclimatologist David Montgomery and geologist William Ryan have argued that flood myths are oral sediment cores cultural records that preserve information about real events in narrative form. When analyzed alongside geological evidence, these myths align with datable climate shifts, sea level changes, and regional disasters. This is not to say every flood story is literal. Mythology serves many functions: moral, cosmological, political. But embedded within the symbolism, there are echoes of actual catastrophes. Which brings us to a more controversial question. Were all the floods natural? Or could some have been triggered by forces we have only recently begun to understand? Mainstream geology teaches us that the Earth changes slowly. Erosion, sedimentation, tectonic drift measured in centimeters per year. This is uniformitarianism, the idea that the same processes we see today have operated throughout Earth as history. But there is another school of thought, catastrophism, the idea that Earth's history has been punctuated by sudden, violent events, impacts, supervolcanoes, pole shifts, rapid climate collapses. For much of the 20th century, catastrophism was dismissed as fringe science. But in recent decades, evidence has mounted that challenges the slow change model. Consider the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, the planet suddenly plunged back into near glacial conditions. Temperatures dropped. Ice sheets re-advanced. Megafauna went extinct. Human populations collapsed. The cause? Possibly a comet or asteroid impact over the North American ice sheet, triggering massive wildfires, atmospheric cooling, and the catastrophic release of glacial meltwater into the oceans. Evidence includes elevated levels of iridium and platinum in sediment layers, nanodiamonds, carbon spherules, and shocked quartz, all consistent with extraterrestrial impact. The discovery of the Hiawatha crater beneath Greenland's ice sheet in 2018 provided a potential smoking gun. If the impact occurred, it would have sent shockwaves around the world. Tsunamis, floods, firestorms. Entire ecosystems obliterated overnight. Could this event be the origin of the global flood myths? Some researchers think so. Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and others have argued that the end of the Ice Age was marked not just by slow melting, but by catastrophic events, impacts, crustal displacement, rapid sea level rise that destroyed a global maritime civilization and forced the survivors to rebuild from scratch. This remains controversial. Mainstream archaeology finds no evidence of a pre-Ice Age advanced civilization. But the question persists. If such a culture existed along the now drowned coastlines, how would we know? Their cities would be underwater, their records erased. Only the myths would remain. And those myths speak not just of water, but of fire from the sky, of darkness, of the earth shaking. Perhaps the flood was not the only catastrophe. Perhaps it was the culmination of many, a perfect storm of cosmic and terrestrial disasters that reshaped the planet and left humanity reeling. Which leads us to the most speculative question of all. Did the survivors of these floods understand what had happened? Did they watch the sky, track the cycles, and attempt to warn future generations? What if the ancients were not primitive? What if they were survivors? Survivors of a world-ending event. Survivors who understood that the cosmos operates in cycles. That catastrophe is not random. That the stars hold the key to survival. This is the premise of archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient peoples observed and recorded celestial events. And the more we look, the more we find. Alignments, calendars, sky maps encoded in monuments, myths, and mathematics. Göbekli Tepe, as mentioned, appears to depict constellations and possibly a comet impact. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns with Orion's belt. Why this obsession with the sky? Because the sky changes. And when it changes, disaster follows. Precession shifts the position of stars over millennia. Solar cycles affect climate. Meteor streams cross Earth's orbit on predictable schedules. If ancient peoples experienced catastrophic impacts or climate shifts linked to celestial events, they would have had every reason to track the heavens. Some myths explicitly encode this knowledge. The Greek story of Phaethon, who lost control of the sun chariot and scorched the earth, may describe a meteor impact or solar storm. The Norse myth of Ragnarok, the world consumed by fire and flood, echoes similar themes of cosmic destruction. The Hopi prophecy of the blue star Kashina, the Mayan prophecy of the end of cycles. These are not fairy tales. They are warnings. And if the builders of the megaliths were indeed encoding astronomical knowledge, then the flood myths may be part of a larger message. Asterisk, this has happened before. It will happen again. Watch the sky. Asterisk, whether or not we choose to listen is another matter. But if the flood was a turning point, if it destroyed one world and gave birth to another, then the survivors would have been the seed of all that followed. And perhaps some of them carried forward not just stories, but asterisk civilization itself. Asterisk, after the waters recede, what remains? Mud, ruin, silence, but also memory and the will to rebuild. Imagine the survivors emerging from the highlands, descending to the river valleys, surveying the devastated lowlands. The world they knew is gone. The coastlines have vanished. The forests are drowned. The herds have scattered. Everything must begin again. But they are not starting from zero. They carry with them knowledge, agriculture, tool-making, navigation, astronomy. They carry stories, stories of the world before the flood, of the gods who sent it, of the signs that warned of its coming. Some researchers believe that the sudden appearance of advanced civilizations in Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica around 3000 BC was not the beginning of civilization, but an asterisk rekindling asterisk. That the survivors of an earlier flood-destroyed culture seeded the great river valley civilizations with knowledge preserved from before. This would explain certain anomalies. The sudden sophistication of Egyptian mathematics and astronomy, the advanced hydraulic engineering of the Sumerians, the megalithic precision of sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru and Baalbek in Lebanon, the astronomical alignments of structures built by peoples who supposedly had no writing, no metal, no wheels. Perhaps these were not innovations. Perhaps they were rememberings. The myths themselves hint at this. The Egyptian god Thoth, bringer of writing and wisdom. The Sumerian asterisk, Apkallu asterisk, the 7 sages who emerged after the flood to teach humanity. And Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought agriculture and law. Everywhere, there are stories of culture bringers, beings who appeared after catastrophe and restored knowledge. Were they gods? Or were they survivors? We may never know, but the pattern is striking, and it suggests that memory, cultural memory encoded in myth, ritual, and monument, was the most valuable survival technology humanity ever developed, because memory is how we learn, how we adapt, how we prepare for the next catastrophe. And the earth has not stopped changing. Deep in the Jordan Rift Valley, where the land itself is tearing apart, there once lay a vast body of water known as Lake Lisan. It was the ancestor of the Dead Sea, but much larger, much deeper, stretching from the Sea of Galilee in the north to beyond the modern Dead Sea's southern shore. And it was fed by runoff from the melting glaciers, by seasonal storms, by the drainage of an entire region. Around 16,000 years ago, something changed. The climate warmed, the rains increased, and Lake Lisan began to rise rapidly. Sediment cores taken from the lake bed reveal layers upon layers of flooding, laminated deposits marking catastrophic inflows. In one pulse, the lake rose by 80 meters. Entire valleys drowned. Shorelines shifted kilometers overnight. And then, just as suddenly, the water fell. The climate dried. The lake evaporated, shrinking down to the hypersaline basin we know today as the Dead Sea. But the sediments remember. Each layer is a page in a book. Each flood event is a chapter. And the book is still being read. Geologists studying Lake Lisan have correlated its flood events with the same meltwater pulses that raised global sea levels. The timing matches, the scale matches, and the region, the ancient Near East, the cradle of civilization, was home to the earliest flood myths we possess. Could the rising of Lake Lisan have been the flood remembered by the Sumerians? By the Hebrews? By the Canaanites? It's possible. The lake sat at the crossroads of human migration. Its floods would have displaced communities, destroyed settlements, forced peoples to flee, and the memory of that displacement would have traveled with them. The lake is smaller now. The water is dead, but the story is alive, because the earth itself is an archive. And if we know how to read it, it will tell us everything. Why does water haunt us? Not just as myth, not just as memory, but as metaphor, as symbol, as the language of the subconscious. Water is chaos. Water is womb. Water is death and rebirth. It dissolves the old and makes way for the new. In every culture, in every age, water represents transformation. The flood, then, is not just a historical event. It is an archetype, a pattern embedded in the human psyche. Carl Jung would have called it a primordial image, a symbol so ancient, so universal, that it arises independently in the collective unconscious of humanity. Mircea Eliade would have called it a myth of eternal return, the belief that the world must periodically be destroyed and renewed in order to remain sacred. In this reading, the flood is not about punishment or disaster. It is about cleansing, about starting over, about washing away corruption and decay to restore purity and order. Every religion, every spiritual tradition, every story of apocalypse carries this theme. The world grows old. Humanity grows wicked. The gods or God or nature or fate decide to reset the clock. And water is the agent of that reset. But there is another layer, a darker one. What if the flood represents not divine will, but human forgetting? What if the flood myths are warnings, not about the gods' anger, but about our own fragility, our dependence on the environment, our vulnerability to climate shifts, rising seas, cosmic impacts? What if the ancients encoded these warnings in myth, because myth is the only language that survives? Writing decays, stone erodes, but stories, told around fires, passed from elder to child, woven into ritual and song, stories endure. The flood is both history and prophecy. It happened, and it will happen again, not because the gods decree it, but because the earth is alive, and life is change. And change, sometimes, is catastrophic. The question is not whether the waters will rise again. The question is, will we remember? Somewhere right now, ice is melting. In Greenland, in Antarctica, in the glaciers of Alaska, the Himalayas, the Andes. Slowly at first, then faster, faster than models predicted, faster than we are prepared for. The oceans are rising. Miami floods at high tide. Venice sinks deeper every year. The Maldives plan evacuation. Bangladesh builds seawalls that will not be enough. We call it climate change. We call it global warming. We call it the Anthropocene. But the ancients would have called it something else. They would have called it the return of the waters, the end of an age, the closing of a cycle, and they would have told a story of hubris, of peoples who grew too proud, too comfortable, too forgetful, who built cities on the shores and assumed the sea would stay where it was, who ignored the warnings, who laughed at the prophets. And then the waters came. We are not so different. We have forgotten that the earth does not belong to us, that coastlines are temporary, that the climate is not a constant but a variable, subject to forces far beyond our control. We have forgotten the flood, but the flood has not forgotten us. Right now, beneath the waves, there are forests. There are villages. There are coastlines that once teemed with life. And one day, centuries or millennia from now, our own cities may join them. New York, London, Shanghai, Mumbai. Submerged relics of a civilization that thought itself immune to the cycles of the earth. And if we are lucky, if any survive, they will tell stories. Stories of the world before the waters. Stories of those who built towers of glass and steel, who flew through the skies and spoke across oceans, who knew so much and remembered so little. They will carve warnings into stone. They will sing songs of what was lost. They will look at the rising tides and say, asterisk, this has happened before. Asterisk. And perhaps, if they are wise, they will prepare. Because the flood is not a myth. It is a pattern, a cycle, a memory that repeats. And we are living in the space between one flood and the next. The camera pulls back. The ice continues to melt. The waters continue to rise. And somewhere, in a language not yet spoken, a future generation will tell our story. The story of the people who knew the flood was coming and did nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, the story of the people who remembered, who listened, who learned from the past and built for the future, who became the survivors, the seed, the memory keepers. That story has not been written yet, but it is being written now.